Thanks for joining us. Before we begin, I'd just like to say a big thank you to the organisers of this festival. In my own opinion, it's a really very important event that happens in Belfast now. This is the 7th time, and I think it's going from strength to strength. And the fact that we're having even a session like this bears testimony to the vision of the organisers, because these are the sort of things that don't happen, as you all know, very often. It's very, very difficult to get people together of this calibre very often. So it's thank you to the festival organisers, thank you to the sponsors and the funders, obviously, and I hope you enjoy what's about to get discussed this evening. I'm Catherine Kelly, and as you can probably pick up already from my own accent, I was born and grew up there in Belfast many, many years ago. But today I'm in my home, which is in Harhoura, which is just south of the capital of Morocco, Rabat. I'm joined for our conversation by a real mixture of very interesting characters altogether. These are people I've known and worked with over the years, and hopefully what we're going to have this evening then is an interesting conversation about the last 12 months. I'd first of all like to introduce you to Clyde Maggi. Clyde is shorthand for Clyde. He's a cybersecurity expert. He's based over in Tallinn, the capital of Estonia. And I'm not going to waste any time explaining more about what you do, Clyde. Give us a sense of, your role at the moment, the kind of work that you do, and more importantly, just set the scene for us. What you were doing until this time last year, how you were working.
Hello, my name is Clyde Maggi. I'm from Estonia, as Catherine said. Thank you very much for the introduction, Catherine. So I'm an international cybersecurity expert. I have been working for Estonian government for many years. I was also head of Estonian National Computer Emergency Response Team. This is basically governmental central cybersecurity unit, let's say the way, who is taking care of the governmental cybersecurity situation and the landscape. At the moment, I'm working internationally. It's of course, this international at the moment is a quite difficult way to say it. But my customers, let's say the way, are from Southeast Asia till the Caribbean, so it's everywhere. And till the last March, I was mostly traveling, mostly have been being away from home. But obviously, last almost 12 months from now on, I've been working remotely at home as we are doing this conference remotely. This situation is a little bit, unusual. Everybody have to, understand the new normality. Hopefully, it's not going to last long, but we have to be ready that this situation is not the first one, not the last one, and we have to, find a way how to do whatever we are doing the way as the situation is at the moment. So anyway, cybersecurity, it's sometimes it's a little bit overreacted topic. I quite often heard that people will say that everybody's talking about cybersecurity and why it's so important, because I don't see anything and I don't know anything about it. And it may be right in some of the circumstances. But from other side, you all have to understand that as long as everybody is working remotely, as long as we are using this technology as our everyday, helpers, what helps us to do our job, we have to be sure that all this environment, the infrastructure is safe. And I can tell you, nothing is safe nowadays, and the situation is basically going worse and worse. And
Clyde, I'm gonna interrupt you there. I mean, I don't want to start with doom and gloom for everybody, but you're right. I understand. You and I've talked about this a lot over the last few months, that people need to understand. I think we'll drill into that a wee bit later, actually. But if you're okay, that's a good introduction for us now. Can I move over to Mr. Maxwell? With two Dominics, I suppose we could use your surnames, or we could draw attention to the fact that one of you has facial hair and one of you doesn't have that much. So Mr. Maxwell, with the less hirsute facial expressions, you are the Times, well, give me your full title, I don't want to underplay it, but you've been working for the Times as a critic, both in theatre and comedy for quite some time. And again, the same sort of question, give us a sense of what you were doing until this time last year, what a typical working week looked like, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, straight as soon as this ends, I'm going to go and change some of my online passwords. I think I've only got 2 after what Clyde said.
Exactly.
Yeah, this time last year, my job title is theatre critic and comedy critic for the Times. I also do features, so theatre editor for the Times, whatever that means. Now, like everyone else, I'm very much housebound. A year ago, I was probably spending at least 4 nights a week out. Certainly some of the time I'd be travelling around. I'd be reviewing theatre and to a lesser extent comedy around Britain. I was just looking actually, and I think the very last thing I covered before lockdown was Alexei's Sale in Liverpool, along with about 30,000 Real Madrid fans, it turned out, in a, so I think, notorious visit that was. So yes, my life has changed enormously. Principally because I'm just not like everyone else. I'm not getting out anymore, but my work required me to get out several times a week.
Absolutely, I can imagine that's quite dramatic. And like you said, it was typical 4 nights a week to be down in the West End, and I forgot to tell everybody, we're talking to you. You're in London, but you would have been in the West End a lot, and like you said, a bit of travel. I assume there's no theatres open. Is that the case in London these days?
Yes, I mean there has been. There was a brief moment in, I think, the beginning of December when there was about a week, 2 weeks when things were open and it suddenly looked hopeful, and then that was taken away again. So there were a few things back then. There was some socially distanced comedy. Again, that isn't happening at the moment. There's been bits and bobs, but more often than not, there's been absolutely nothing. It's been online only.
Right. We'll come back to the streaming, obviously, later. Over to her sweet facial Dominic. Hello, Dominic Register. So we find you in Salzburg, obviously in Austria, and you work for the rather wonderful Salzburg Global Seminar. Am I giving it the right title?
Correct, yes.
Correct, good. Now, I mean, those of us who know what that is have nothing but respect for it. But if you could start off, give us a sense of what actual Global Seminar is, what you do, the networks that you build. And then also, yeah, again, like the other guys, a sense of what your typical working week or month had been until this time last year.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I'm Dominic Register. I'm originally from the UK, from London, but I've been living in Salzburg for the last 4 years, and I'm a program director at Salzburg Global Seminar. So we're a non-profit organization that was set up just after the Second World War in 1947 by an Austrian and 2 Americans who were all at Harvard and were looking at the media coverage of the Marshall Plan and thought it would be interesting to try and establish an intellectual parallel to that they described at the time as a Marshall Plan for the mind. So a new institution that could bring together people who had been on different sides during the Second World War and now needed to find common ground and ways of working together to look for shared solutions to the big transatlantic problems that they anticipated coming up in the late 1940s and 50s. And our organization's mission evolved over time, so it's now a global facing organization, but our core purpose is still very much around challenging current and future leaders to shape a better world. And I lead the work that we do around education and separately around the future of cities. So pre-pandemic, kind of the role divided really into 2 parts. So part of it was organizing the in-person programs that we would host in Salzburg, where we'd invite relatively small groups of people, typically 40 to 50 people, to come and stay with us for somewhere between 2 and 5 days, where they could share the insights that they had that were pertinent to the topic under discussion, and then start to talk about the barriers that they face and how we could think about moving the needle on local or regional or global challenges that they all faced in their work and make progress with these topics. So the programs were always, quite tightly curated, international, interdisciplinary, intergenerational. And then the other part of the work was representing the outcomes from these programs or some of the networks that we support at other people's events, so visiting conferences and speaking or running workshops. So Catherine, the last time that you and I met in person was in Morocco at the International Congress on School Improvements event in Marrakesh, where I was running a workshop with a couple of colleagues. And obviously that aspect of the job has shifted enormously. we've been able to repurpose a lot of our approaches to online events. So we still do a lot of the strategic convening, but now do it with online groups. We've also started doing more work as a partner in larger scale conferences, so putting things like that online. So just this week on Tuesday, we had an event with the World Innovation Summit for Education, looking at education reimagined, where we had about 2,500 people registered. So much bigger numbers than we could ever invite to stay with us in Salzburg.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things you said there really strike a chord with me very profoundly. That the origins of the global seminar, like you said, was conceived back at the end of the Second World War, just before the United Nations got going properly, but it was very much that Marshall Plan for education, a Marshall Plan being the shorthand for a really fresh look at how we do things. And obviously, what jumps at me the way you've expressed it is that's kind of where we're at now as well. I'm sure there's lots of organizations who need to really drill into what they've been doing, how they've been doing it, and they have to turn that juggernaut around again, don't they? So the time is probably very similar to post 45. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
I think there is, so for us, it's our 75th anniversary next year. So we've also been thinking about, the history of the institution and the kinds of programs that we've been involved in or been able to support, and then what we want to help support over the next 75 years. And I think it is a time of kind of contemplation and reflection for lots and lots of institutions. Lots of the UN agencies have been doing similar analysis as you kind of think about the kind of international agenda or the international order moving forward, and how we'll be able to look at collaboration and bringing people together. The idea of sort of physical distance but social connectedness over the next few years, I think, is going to gain more traction.
Beardy, Dominic and I knew each other through the British Council, which obviously as well, by the way, has a very similar origin to the Global Seminar, in as much that it started before the Second World War. It was an organization which started, I think it was winter of 32, when the persecution of Jewish academics had started over in mainland Europe, and they tended to be coming to London then. And thankfully, the British government then realized it was probably a very good idea to employ these guys. And that winter, they started to find work for them in universities and institutions around the UK. And then the British Council came into being in 33, I'm thinking, right, as an organization, thanks to Royal Charter, in acknowledgement of the fact that something awful was going on somewhere in the world, but the rest of us were well equipped to do something about it. So I'd been working for the British Council, and I've been self-employed for a few years. That's how I met Clyde as an education practitioner on funded projects. And that's what I want to move on to next then. So Clyde, you and I spoke about this when we met, I think, in Sri Lanka, that, there we were in Sri Lanka, and I'm not going to be disingenuous with anybody. It was perfectly wonderful to spend a few days, in Colombo at meetings. And we had some success because we were in person. But I had that little voice at the back of my head quite often because of the travel I was in. Do I really need to be here? Do I need to be in country? Couldn't we have done that meeting on Zoom? And you and I spoke a wee bit about that. So this is the sort of next thing I want to get into. Guys, the travel that you'd been doing, Clyde, give us a sense. I mean, you were doing an enormous amount of traveling. And most of it, I'm sure, was very, very useful and valuable. Let's not get into the little bottles of shampoo that we took out of hotels, but it's really important to be in person in countries, and especially working in some of those countries. These are underdeveloped countries, developing their systems, their infrastructure. But give us a sense of the volume of travel that you had been doing. And I remember talking to you a few times. I mean, you were spending more time packing and unpacking than you were at home, weren't you?
It's true. In 2019, I remember I visited 18 countries, and I had something like 130 flights. So yes, traveling have been tremendous at those times. But you're absolutely right that sometimes we are, trying to figure out, do we have to travel and do we have to be physically present in some of the countries? My experience are both ways. So basically, there are countries and there are teams who are able to receive and do cooperation remotely quite well. There are countries who are not able to do it at all. For example, some of the countries facing the problem that, for example, when they have this lockdown situation and everybody have to go home and work from home, then many people, they don't have a proper internet connection or computers at home. So maybe on the phone. And obviously you can chat with them or offer some kind of, to participate in some of the seminars or conferences, but you are not able to proper work remotely. So that's why this pandemic situation and remote work not always work as way we are expecting.
Right. So there we go. That's starting to get to the point I want us to look at. So it's I think what could be valuable for this conversation is reminding ourselves exactly that, Clyde. There was a way that we were working, there was a way that we were performing our jobs that was valuable and relevant then, but it's had to change. But I suppose moving forward, Dominic, Maxwell, I know it's very different for your line of work, but do you remember ever that sense of, oh, it's lovely to be going on to the West End every night of the week. Of course, it must have been great to travel around the UK and go to some of those theatres. But do you remember that sense, there must be another way of doing this? There's no substitute. We're going to come into that in a minute, but there's no substitute for the live audience. Let's not dwell on that for the time being. But do you know what I mean about that little sort of voice inside your head? I wish I didn't have to do this every night. Is there an alternative? Does that ring a bell?
I mean, I think the alternative for me is not having that job. That's what I thought at the time. And yeah, you get tired and you get grouchy sometimes, but it's thrilling as well. And it's a privilege, and you're very aware of that. I mean, what the state we've all been in now, we probably, I don't know if we're getting more sleep, we're probably able to get to bed earlier.
Fair point.
Everything's on a more even keel, isn't it? And maybe not emotionally, but just sort of where you are.
Sure.
Not always.
Yeah. So I didn't want this. I mean, the advantages, I tell you what I used to do occasionally, not like Clyde and you used to do, but I did used to travel occasionally for interviews and things. Now that's all happening here. That's all happening on Zoom. And I'm sure you were far ahead of me back a year ago. To me, this was all a bit Star Trek. This is, can you do that? Does that really work? And now, of course, it's absolutely ordinary. I interviewed a novelist in New Jersey this week, an actress in Nevada the previous week, and occasionally, probably not recently because of the decline of newspaper circulations, but in the olden times, you would have even flown out to do that. Obviously, ecologically, it's a good thing you're not doing that. I don't know. It's not as good. It's not as good talking to someone on Zoom. We'd probably have more fun, the four of us now together. But how much more fun? How much more contact? Wouldn't be 100% more. It might be 20% more. And you can see that the sums are difficult, aren't they?
Right. You've nailed something very much for me, which I think we'll come back to as well. But it's part of the role that I've been playing is in evaluation, and so absolutely, it's different. It's different. We can't do anything about it. It's different. Now, how do people like me professionally evaluate whether it's better or not? But I'm with you. So the bottom line being, the four of us could get together and then might be slightly more meaningful. But actually, it probably wasn't going to happen. How would I ever have got somebody like yourself, Clyde from Estonia, Dominic, who's ordinarily in Austria, with the schedules that the four of us had? So that's the reality. That's always my starting point now. But if I could just leave you with that, I mean, Dominic, that sort of thing about live entertainment, the difference between the way that Clyde and the other Dominic and I have been working, there was, like you say, you're lucky to still have a job. Let's be really candid about it. And then, probably it's because we've had this desert now, this real dry patch of live entertainment. There's no substitute for it. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I went to, after several months, I went to a comedy show last August, I think, and it was just amazing. Yeah. Because you can't quantify when you're having it what the impact of someone in front of you dealing with the moment, dealing with the space, what that is. And I don't want to be too, gooey about it. There's lots of wonderful things you can do on television, on screen. But it is magic. It is real magic. That kind of stuff. Sometimes it's boring as well. Let's not. Sometimes it's rubbish. But there's the capacity for magic, the capacity for wonder goes alongside with the capacity for, oh, I wish I was somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, heaven knows how we're all going to go back into venues, and probably slowly, and we won't all rush in, packed together in the same way, maybe. But I think it's important to remember that it is kind of what we imagine it is. It is at its best. It is just a different experience.
Yeah, I'm with you. So let's go over to Mr. Register. The same sort of thing then, Dominic. You've really touched on it a wee bit, and I think as an institution, you've mentioned to me that you had collectively started to stand back and reflect and say, right, what can we do differently? It's the nature of the beast that you work in, that you are innovative and you're constantly trying to work out how things can improve. But again, you mentioned a wee minute ago that, yeah, previously, because you've got that wonderful hotel there, that you could host 50, 60 people. But now, give us a sense of that. So you're doing events where you can hit 2,000 and 3,000 people, and also then it's the diversity, isn't it, of your audiences, which have moved a wee bit, yeah?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like Dominic Maxwell, kind of conscious of the privilege of having had a job throughout this whole period, and sort of ways in which we've been able to adapt and innovate the programs and the kind of people we reach. So, you know, one obvious example of that has been going to scale and being able to engage with many, many more people than we ever could when we'd invite them physically in person for obvious reasons. We've also been able to sort of bring in participation from more senior or more well-known people than we might otherwise have been able to do. So I did an education conference series last year around this idea of education disrupted, education reimagined. And across the 3 events, we had about 20,000 people participate in total. And we also had some fantastically senior speakers involved. So Gordon Brown spoke on at the second event. And, you know, realistically, with his schedule, we would never be able to get him to Salzburg for 5 days. But he was very happy to do kind of 45 minutes Q&A from his sitting room on a Tuesday afternoon. So being able to work with people like that has been really interesting. I think the other thing that has been, we probably should have thought about more beforehand is, you know, all of our programs, when we did the in-person programs, were funded by partners. So we could, you know, we could spread the opportunity as widely as possible in terms of who we were inviting here, because the cost of participation for the vast majority of people was funded through partners. But the kind of the nature of the ask now is evolving, and as we've started to do more work around network support and network incubation, it's a different kind of time ask. So you're asking people to be part of what you're doing for an hour a month, for example, rather than for 5 intense days. And that means people who've got other commitments, like around childcare, for example, or people who are self-employed, for whom 5 days being part of an event like ours would be a difficult ask, because there'd be direct economic consequences, are more able to participate. So it's been interesting for us to think about how we can use the kind of current circumstances to expand the opportunity for a wider variety of people.
Yeah, and that's been my experience as well, that I have to acknowledge the fact that whilst I'm not jumping on planes too much, then I've had access to people that I probably wouldn't have had access to. And I think you made a very valid point there, Dominic, that the diversity of people who would have had a challenge both financially and in their own personal circumstances, who couldn't have got to your events, you know, they can dip in and dip out a wee bit more. Now, I don't like to hear myself saying things just for the sake of it, but, you know, that has to be a good thing. I mean, it is a good thing, isn't it, that you are reaching more people and a more diverse audience? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, the kind of the nature of the engagement changes as well. So, you know, we've tried to think about the impact the programs we organize have in terms of their impact on individuals, on institutions and ideas. And I think it's harder to track some of that with the larger scale conferencing, where there's less space for serendipity, or there's less space for kind of just talking stuff over with a beer in the evening. That, you know, it's more engineered and more programmed in the online space. So it's hard to track the consequences of that. And I think the loss of serendipitous opportunities or new thinking is very hard to quantify. But the being able to reach more people and going to scale and and sharing the network with a wider variety of people is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. That rings a real bell with me. If I could just come back to you, and I don't think Maxwell, before I come back to you, Clyde. So one of the things, I mean, it's the four of us, but certainly the three of you working in very diverse and very distinct ways and different sectors. That goes without saying. As a broad stroke, I think it's been easier for the likes of both Dominic Register, myself, and Clyde to move more online. It's obvious for you, Mr. Maxwell, that it's just not the same. But you and I had a chat the other day about this, and it's something I'd love to hear a wee bit more about. So you've already alluded to it. You would have to go and sit through 90 minutes, 2 hours of a performance. 10 or 15 minutes and you might start to twitch a bit and look at your watch. But you had to sit through it, didn't you? You had to stay there, not least because it's your job, but one doesn't tend to leave a live audience unless it's really dreadful. Yeah. But just remind me what you were saying the other day about that. There is a payoff, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's very hard for things to be boring online because people just switch off. And actually, some of the greatest works of art ever created, I mean, Shakespeare, let's not pretend he's always easy. I wouldn't trust anyone who wouldn't say, oh, I was sort of 5 minutes in, I was thinking, heavens, it's in another language. How am I going to make it through this?
Yeah.
And actually, it's great. And in a good production, it depends when, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, even an hour in, you suddenly go, oh, heavens, this is extraordinary. This is like nothing else. But there's a pain barrier. And, I, like anyone else, I don't want to put myself through that pain barrier voluntarily, necessarily. So you are used to a quicker hit with TV, which has become the dominant form. So I'm not calling for things to be more boring. Obviously we want as little boredom as possible. But there is something about submitting yourself in an enclosed space, which it's hard to get out of, that enables different things to happen. Not always better things, but sometimes better things. And certainly sitting with my children, as we do every night now, watching things, if something's not entertaining after 5 or 10 minutes, it's hard work to get them to agree to keep watching on. Right. You must be bored, children. It's good for you.
Well, that's it for me, and I think it's such a really valuable lesson that those of us of a certain age, we've had life before internet. We've had a life pre-online. So we know there has to be long, quiet periods. But again, this ties in a wee bit to what we were talking about, what Dominic Register, you and I have been talking about as well. It's that idea that it is a marathon. It's not just a short dash, sure it's not. And so I suppose, Mr. Maxwell, referring to your two daughters and whatever, that sort of situation, is it something you're starting to get nervous about, that actually being online more? I suppose what I'm asking, can we develop skills for our young people? Can we now stand still for a few minutes? And this will be relevant for you, Mr. Register, as well. I mean, when it comes to the education and the future of our children online, what do we now know? We know what the value is of being online, but what's the biggest challenge now with having just an online existence and missing the boredom, if that makes sense? Should we go to you? We'll stay with you, Mr. Maxwell. Do you want to say a few words on that? Or?
Oh, I was just muting myself there. What's the biggest challenge? I don't know. My kids' education is another matter, I think. I do think there are muscles built up by being, as I say, by being forced to be somewhere else. I mean, for example, I found one of the most useful things when I started being a theatre critic, having spent my childhood going to Catholic Mass. And being used to sitting there bored sometimes and thinking, make it through now, make it through, and you get through the other end. So you build up muscles, So there we go. Catholicism.
Yeah. No, I think that will ring quite a bell with quite a lot of our audience, considering we're in Northern Ireland, some of us anyway, yeah. And it is a life skill that it can't be all bells and whistles every minute of the day. I think that's interesting. Does that ring true for you then, Dominic Register, about how you now start to think about how you're planning your events and your inputs? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think on the point about education, a lot of our education work here is focused on social and emotional learning, and there's a lot of social and emotional development which is harder to acquire through online engagement. There's a lot of the kind of capacity for empathy, or the relationships which are formed, or the visual cues, or the kind of multiple cues you can take to understand someone's meaning when you're with them in person. A lot of that is different. I think there've been some really interesting innovations over the last 12 months to kind of help teachers, or led by teachers who are delivering lessons online. There's also, we need to be conscious constantly of the privilege that only, a small percentage of the world's children whose schooling has been disrupted over the last year have been able to access online learning. There's a huge, a vast number who haven't been able to do that. But I think that the direction of travel for more and more education systems seems to be around accepting that this idea of hybrid learning is going to become more normal, and there'll be times where learning needs to be delivered remotely rather than in person. And so there's a lot of interesting research going on around how you can do that effectively, and how you can help young people in school develop their social and emotional, as well as their cognitive and physical and creative skills in an online environment.
No, I think, that's a good point. I think it's time for a bit more doom and gloom then, Clyde. Let's dig into a little bit about what's been happening, and obviously you will be discreet, but when it comes to both the volume and the nature of cyber attacks over the last 12 months, what can you tell us about that without giving away too many secrets? Is it fair to say we've been bombarded? I mean, I've read various accounts of what's going on out there, but can you give us a sense of so many more people being online, so much more these last 12 months? Has that had an impact for the nature of your work?
Actually, it's yes, you're right. There is lots of different kind of information available, but in the end of the day, I could say last 15 years, 20 years, maybe from beginning of the internet times, the number of cyber incidents have been increasing every year, absolutely every year. And mostly this is obviously made by cyber criminals. So I could say 90+% of the cases or incidents or attacks behind that are cyber criminals. Of course, we have those state-sponsored attackers and activities as well, but let it be. Nowadays, I could say that cybercrime is the most secure way to commit crime. Everybody knows this. And not only we are going to online, all the criminals, they are also going to online. They know that this is quite safe for them to be there. In cyber world, we don't have a country borders, we don't have a time zones, we have just one, environment where we are living, one bubble. And it's if you have skills enough, then it's quite safe to commit crimes there. And for the law enforcement side, it's quite difficult to catch those guys because they are smart and they may sit everywhere around the world. And of course, the situation is getting worse and worse every year. We have to focus, we have to push hard to fight against this. But I could say that the next 10, 15 years, nothing's going to change. The situation still goes worse. And even if we are pushing hard, even if you're doing this awareness raising and explaining to everybody what they have to change in their mindset, in their behavior, in their everyday activity, the actual benefit is quite small on that. So situation is bad and going to be worse.
It's going to get worse, yeah. And there's no idiot's guide to this, but if you could, I know you have a teenage daughter, give us a sense of the sort of things you frighten her with, or tell her to tell her friends. I mean, low-hanging fruit for me is privacy settings, isn't it? But what would your... Yeah, go ahead.
I always have been explaining to them when I'm doing different kind of trainings, giving presentation and explaining to the people what they have to do. The point is that again, maybe I'm wrong, but most of those cyber incidents have been happening because we haven't done some basic things, some simple basic things. So to survive in this cruel cyber world, we have to be a little bit over the average. So this is basically, if you are in the middle of the desert and a lion can attack you, you don't have to run faster than lion to escape. You have to run faster than your friend. Understand the point? And in the cyber, the same thing. You have to be a little bit over the average, a little bit better than this most of the companies or most of the people. And then cyber criminals, they don't want to spend too many resources on you to attack you, to get access to your data and your files, and they will choose those weaker ones. So just let's try to be a little bit over the average, and then this gonna helps us a lot.
Oh, that gives me the shivers that I just have to be able to run faster than my friends. But yeah, I think that's probably a good life lesson for a few of us, isn't it? Could we think a wee bit more then? We've talked a wee bit about the travel that the four of us have done quite a lot between us, but Dominic Register, you and I were talking the other day about this, and I love that analogy. I'll give you the opportunity to use it in a minute, but what's happening now could have been predicted up to a point, and indeed was, not least Mr. Bill Gates alluded to it 5 and 6 years ago, that we were facing a global pandemic. I mean, I lived in Hong Kong in 2005, just in the aftermath of SARS. I came to North Africa just when MERS was happening. So the fact that we've got another respiratory syndrome problem, isn't shocking to any of us. But this, like you articulated it beautifully, this is just almost the warm-up show, isn't it? So the big elephant in the room, which I don't think we've all really engaged with properly yet. I think there's a lot of lip service being paid to it, but it is the climate crisis, isn't it? So can you just remind me what you said the other day? I think it's a very nice way of explaining.
Yeah, sure. It's something I'm shamelessly stealing from someone I heard speak from at UNICEF, a brilliant woman called Anya Nielsen. And she used this framing of, in many ways, COVID is the class test, but climate change is the end of year exam, which resonates in kind of education geeky circles very well. So, the opportunity, if that's the right way, is, what are we learning about behavior, about, what works effectively during this, in the last 12 months, all the different innovations which have mushroomed up in multiple different sectors that we can begin to mainstream or help reach many, many more people. Because if we are entering a period of much greater climate disruption or disruption caused by climate change, that there's going to be a kind of large scale behavioral change required in lots of different ways. I think, one of a neat example of this, there was a survey done by a US think tank called RAND last year in sort of May, June time, so relatively early on in the pandemic. And they found that schools which had a high or strong culture of teacher cooperation pre-pandemic across the US had been much better able to support students and the school community during the pandemic. And this was true in red or blue states, in urban or rural communities across the board. If you had a high culture of teacher cooperation pre-pandemic, as an institution, they were better able to support. So you think, well, that's a really interesting insight, because there's a lot that could be done now to help many more schools around the world develop that kind of culture of teacher cooperation, which will stand them in good stead moving forward. And there'll be, multiple other insights like that from across a wide range of sectors and societies that we could, you want to help socialize those ideas now to help spread them more widely so that they become the norm and will help populations be better able to cope with future disruptions, and whether that is, another pandemic or something caused by climate change or something caused by something else. I think the other interesting thing, really interesting learning thing that I've had the chance to learn about during the last few months is, countries like Sierra Leone, where they had your example from Hong Kong, Catherine, where, in Sierra Leone, they had learned a lot about managing education during periods of disruption because of what had happened with Ebola a few years ago. So they were able to put a lot of that learning into practice very quickly when the coronavirus crisis struck. So, you know, in some ways, the system was more resilient or was better able to adapt quickly to support their students' learning during this, you know, during the disruption caused last year.
Yeah, for me, that's it. So, you know, where I sit, folks, as a relaxed UK passport holder, these last 10, 15 years, coming back to the UK, it's been a constant source of amusement to me with the changes in health and safety. And so, of course, then that was really put to a test last year, wasn't it? And I could hold my head up high until last year, saying, yes, the UK really does put health and safety first. Now, I'm sitting in a country, population of approximately less than 40 million. And my question would be to any audience, how many people do you think died in care homes last year here in Morocco? Well, the answer is 0. Not one person died in a care home in Morocco. But let's be clear, there aren't very many care homes here. And that feeds into the culture of both this religious tradition and a cultural tradition. They live in multi-generational families. In other words, there's no embarrassment that you've got your old people living under the same roof with you. More importantly then, what happened, I sat and laughed out loud, as I'm sure quite a few people did. By July last year, our Prime Minister, Mr. Johnson, who had survived that brutal dose of COVID, he was quite vocal about the fact that, you know, being overweight wasn't necessarily the best way to have gone into it. But what did he do in the next breath? He said, right, go and have more pizza. So basically in August, we were encouraged to pig out to help out, weren't we? And so I hear you saying things like, Dominic, and I think it's the cornerstone of most education that I've been involved in, is you must learn from your mistakes. But I'm afraid we do tend to make some of the same mistakes again, don't we? But that's all part and parcel of it. Could we just now think a wee bit then? Let's go to you, Dominic Maxwell. I want to get back into a couple of things with you, which is this whole live experience, and no substitute for it, fine. But moving forward then, you know, I had a quick look as an externalist myself. I mean, the distribution, the sales for the newspapers in the UK is unsurprisingly lamentable. I think the Metro used to be, that's the free newspaper I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Metro had the biggest distribution this time last year, which was over 1.5 million. And they've plummeted, unsurprisingly, to 600,000. The Times is something similar. I think they disclosed that your readership was, but paper copies of the newspaper were a respectable around 800,000, but I can't get accurate figures for what it is these days. But your online subscriptions have gone up, obviously, quite significantly. Now, professionally, for someone like yourself, does that have any impact, knowing that your audience is mostly online now? And going back to what you're starting to say about watching TV with the kids, you know, if you don't grab them in the first few minutes, you've lost them. Have you started to think about this a wee bit more, that actually you better grab people a bit more because they are going to basically swipe left more often?
Well, I hope I do that anyway. I mean, I think that's sort of the job is to, I don't think in writing you have to always sort of start with your strongest suit, but I think in journalism, in newspaper journalism, you always want to try to hook people. You're absolutely right. It's probably that process is accelerated online. I don't know about everyone else. I mean, when I look through the newspaper online, which I do most days, although the newspaper is, I think, a better technology, but I mean, it's harder to get, it's more expensive. When I look through stories online, I go, that I know I'm interested in, let's try that, yada, yada. You better interest me in a paragraph or I'm out of here. I'm not particularly proud of that. And if I've got more time, I'll do better than that. But that's just how it is. Yeah. So yes, undoubtedly being online accelerates that process. I mean, personally, as someone writing, I don't think it affects me in that I always try and hook you successfully or not quick anyway. And also, because we're behind a paywall, the dream is you find something through Twitter or whatever, you get, I don't know, the first paragraph free, and then you have to register or subscribe to it. The dream is my first paragraph is so exciting. You immediately subscribe.
No, it's fair enough. I'm guilty of that. I mean, I think I told you the other day, I resisted the temptation for a long time to subscribe to a newspaper, and I capitulated, and it is capitulation. I capitulated last year at this time because I figured, right, the quality of their journalism is still good. So to hell with it, I'll give them a few quid every month. I honestly felt, between you and me, as soon as I paid for it, I felt, look, there's nothing left to read in this bloody paper, because I felt actually I'd already been getting the best of it free, if you know what I mean. That's not true. A year later, it's not true. Anyway, Clyde, let's give us a sense then where you're at professionally. So you're stuck at home. Your wife and daughter see a hell of a lot more of you. You see a lot more of them. I know you got skiing a couple of weeks ago, but what's the immediate future looking like? Do you have a sense? Can you give me a sense of what you think is going to happen in sort of the short to medium term? Are you going to be housebound, or what do you think is around the corner in the next few months for work for you?
I'm optimist, and I hope that the situation is going to be over soon. And when we will get our vaccination, then the situation is going to be, at least traveling, going to be easier, and then I can go back to whatever I have to do in different places. But of course, I have been like a heavy traveler for the last 6 or 7 years, so it actually felt good to sit home 1 week. There's lots of things what was postponed, my different things what I wanted to do at home, and so on. I'm not worried about the family, because I'm traveling also a lot with my family. My family is quite often with me in different business trips. So this is not the issue that we haven't saw each other. This is actually just to be at home, just to have maybe more free time, at least in last summer. Of course, starting from last autumn, everybody somehow started to use in this situation, and I can say that I have more time. For example, as I said, some of my customers are in Southeast Asia, some of my customers are in Caribbean. So it used to be the way that when I'm traveling to the Southeast Asia, for example, to Singapore or Kuala Lumpur, then I'm dealing with this customer and this customer only when I'm there. And when I'm traveling to, I don't know, Dominican Republic, then I'm dealing with this customer. But at the moment, the situation is that my mornings sometimes are beginning in 5 a.m. because I'm dealing with Southeast Asia customer, and my evening's gonna last till the midnight because I'm dealing with Caribbean customer, and in the same day. And with such a, how to say, organization level, when you're dealing with so much things in one day, it's also complicated and difficult. So as Mr. Maxwell previously said, that we can sleep more because we are not traveling as much. Sometimes it's vice versa for me, and then you cannot sleep because you have to deal, with different continents and at the same day. But you also asked about the daughter. Then of course, the biggest problem for the youngsters, I have teenager daughter, is this social engagement, physical social engagement. So if they can't see, even if we have been talking all the time that all the youngsters are sitting online all the time, at the end of the day, I can see how difficult it is not to see friends, not to go hang out somewhere in the, I don't know, old town in Tallinn and so on. So for them, this is definitely more difficult than for us.
I think that's very true. I've got nephews and nieces and lots of friends. I mean, you have 2 teenagers now, Dominic. I mean, do you think they have suffered more than you because they haven't had their friends, or how do you balance that one?
Oh, they definitely have, yeah. They're both quite cheerful types, and they're both get quite low. They're going back to school. Well, we're pre-recording this, so we're recording it just before they go back to school. Okay. So we'll see. But they've got exams coming up, and anyway, very hard for them. It's been a year, more than a year, sort of in limbo, and bad enough for us. But they're, it's whatever. It's 8% of their lives, 7%, whatever it is.
Absolutely, yeah. And Dominic, register. You have 2 little ones. Your oldest one's 6 now, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and the youngest one is coming up for 2.
He's coming up for 2, so he's really blissfully oblivious, isn't he?
Yeah, and I'm, selfishly, that the kind of closure of cultural life and bars and restaurants hasn't affected us massively, because that was something other people did and we weren't part of anyway with young kids at home. It's been, it's obviously not traveling means that you're present more, although like Clyde, I find that the days are very long and that you're doing things early in the morning to be able to work with friends and partners in Australia and New Zealand, and then you're doing things late at night to work with people in the US or Latin America. But, you know, to be able to be present at dinner time and bedtime stories and things has been great.
Yeah, that's got to be a good thing. As I've described myself to some friends, I do live on my own, and I live in quite an isolated little community, and I've been calling myself sort of the Aung San Suu Kyi of North Africa, because I really have been under house arrest. I mean, it's been solitary confinement. Now, I had to get my head around that quite early on, and the way that I did it was via this. I've been talking to friends like yourselves, but I've reignited friendships which had sort of been lying dormant for a few years, and I come away from the year very grateful for the likes of these calls, Zoom and all the other technology. And back to you, Clyde, you and I had a joke the other day. I mean, I've heard myself saying something until you and I spoke, which was, I really don't miss all the traveling. I really don't miss being in departure lounges. I haven't been missing packing. But then after you and I spoke, I thought, hold on a minute. There is a perverse sort of discipline that packing gives one. So you've got your little 20 kilos or whatever, you've got your hand luggage. And I started to think about it after you and I spoke. I was like, you know what? There is something to miss in the real dreary side of traveling. I used to I got quite organized about making sure I had the right books ready. I had everything on my laptop. Now, I've got very, what's the word? I'm less efficient. Does that ring a bell? When you don't travel, and you were doing a hell of a lot more than I certainly was, but when you don't have that discipline, have you noticed that you're a wee bit, you know, less organized in your working life? Does that ring a bell?
Yes, there is plenty of jokes in the internet how this average Zoom meeting looks like. So everybody's sitting with the shirts and suits and with no pants. But,
exactly.
but this is one example. So, for example, if you're working remotely at home, what is your how to say average behavior? If you wake up, you will just sit behind the computer, or if you will go wash yourself, you know, change your clothes and then go behind your computer. So definitely this home working have been changing our behaviors, and then they are more maybe lazy and not as organized as another situation when we have to go out or we have to go traveling, and I have to think through how many shirts and how many ties and things I will take with me, because if I'm home, I don't have to think of those questions.
Yeah, that was my point. I mean, we're recording this on Friday the 5th, so it's the first Friday of the month, so that's the day we all have our showers, isn't it? So that's good news. But yeah, I get that side of it. Listen, we're going to wrap up, folks, because our time's nearly up. But the last thing I just wanted to ask the three of you, you know, I've spent and invested a lot of time wondering what's going on out there that we can't touch, feel, smell, and know about. So in my own little wacky world, I have this sort of prediction that, well, you know, human beings, the nature of the beast, we are resilient, we're innovative, we're creative. Good things will come. I mean, I'm sure most of us have had turmoil this year, but I don't want to put a Californication on it. I don't want to end an upbeat just for the Hollywood ending. But I'd be interested if you have any predictions, not just professionally. So, for example, I've mooted it to you that, you know, wouldn't surprise me if there's a new cult coming somewhere. In other words, a new religion. There's a group of people somewhere. Maybe it's Kanye West. Maybe Kanye's going to be the new high priest of some wacky religious movement. But what I mean by that is, you know, knowing human nature, and the three of us come at it, four of us come at it from a different point. Knowing human nature, understanding what's going on. Do you want to make any sort of a prediction for what you think could happen, whether it's politically, financially, economically, socially, emotionally? Anybody get any wacky ideas about that?
I've got a really unwacky idea.
Go for it.
Well, I don't know if this is quite what you're after, but just about what I write about live arts. And I think the upside of this is that the online stuff that started now, that's been accelerated now, will be a much more important part of that. And I write about stuff that's sometimes expensive, often inaccessible. And I think from now on, there is going to be much more of an effort to spread things digitally, not always as good, not always the same.
Sure.
It's cheaper, it's more democratic. You know, I was talking to some comedians the other day, and they were saying they're going to do tours. They're going to make sure every tour they have at least one streamed show. I'm sure that'll take some fine tuning because theatres want to preserve exclusivity and whatever.
Sure.
But their attitude was, we just can't go back to the idea that of doing a show which people don't get the chance to see online.
No. Yeah, no, I mean, Christ, that would be wonderful, actually. Yeah, I can see that being really important. Yeah. What about you, Mr. Register? Anything you think might happen? What's around the corner?
I've been reading some of the stuff about the idea of a new renaissance and find that quite compelling at the moment. So looking for the kind of societal and cultural and political parallels with what was happening in Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries before the European Renaissance kicked in, and that idea of, maybe this is leaning towards your Hollywood ending, but the idea of, you know, that we could be on the cusp of something really exciting in this great new period of human flourishing that would be more inclusive, where because of everyone's experience with, you know, with online engagement, there'll be the opportunity for new ideas to spread more widely, and that there could be something very exciting coming out of this period of chaos and trauma and disruption. It is compelling and you know, it's something that can draw strength from at the moment, I think.
Oh yes, I'm ready for a renaissance, definitely. And you're my Mr. Renaissance man. What about you, Clyde? Do you reckon anything's around the corner that you want to tell us about?
You know, it's difficult to say what is behind the corner, and
Sure.
something like, I don't know, 1.5 years ago, who could imagine this situation what we're facing today? And once again, I'm optimist, and I hope this is going to be over, and we won't going to see something similar again, and normal life comes back. From other side, definitely we have to be ready that this is not the last one. We're going to face similar situations, lots in the future, and we just somehow we have to change our mindset and the ways we are living, because to be, you know, not to suffer as much, because currently this is like a traumatic to everybody, because it's new, it happened fast, and etc. But if we are able to, you know, set ready our mindset that this is new normality, then probably it's going to be easier, but I'm not sure.
No, I listen, that's a really good place, Dan. We have to make the best out of it, don't we? The clock's telling me the time's up, my friends. So once again, thank you very, very much. Dominic with facial hair, Dominic with less facial hair, Clyde with facial hair. Let's not talk about my facial hair. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you for your time, and we'll keep in touch, obviously. But yeah, that was really enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine.